You'd be surprised. You never know. When you throw a pebble into the pond, you may never know how far the ripples extend and what change they effect. You never know. A few years ago, I received an email from a man who was in the youth group at the first church I served. His name is Jim. He emailed to ask me what my mailing address was, and when I responded, I inquired why he wanted to know, and he emailed back and explained to me. Now, when Jim was a teenager, he grew up in a family with 2 sisters and another brother. His younger brother was a genius. His 2 older sisters were gifted athletes and leaders among their peers, wonderful personalities. But Jim, well, if you looked up the word attitude in Webster's dictionary, there would be Jim's picture. He was a teenager with an attitude. He had a chip on his shoulder. Jim may have been the first person I encountered in ministry after seminary for whom the counsel we received in seminary came to mind. Some people you just have to love into the kingdom. And that is what I set out to do with young Jim. After I left that church for my next call, I heard from Jim again as he had completed college and asked if I would write a letter of recommendation for law school. And after that, the decades passed. And then this email exchange, and in his reply to my query why he was interested in getting my mail address, he explained that he was president of the Rotary Club in Las Vegas, and that he had nominated me for the Paul Holman Award. That certificate hangs in the pastor's study. And it reminds me that what I do for others counts. What you do for others counts. You'd be surprised. You never know. Here's this teenager with a chip on his shoulder and an attitude, and he went on to become a lawyer in a large law firm. He went on to become appointed to a judge. He is a leader of a Bible study in his church and president of the Rotary Club. When I see that Paul Holman Award certificate, it reminds me of what he has made of his life, and I thank God. And I thank God, too, for whatever small part I may have had in it. You never know. If you are a teacher or a coach, you will never know what impact you have on the young people with whom you work. Doctors and nurses, you will never know what your healing touch means in those moments of kindness and compassion in times of difficulty. First responders, police and fire, you never know how your swift action could diminish the depth of a tragedy. Those who serve the public, you will never know when your acts of kindness and helpfulness come at the moment that other person needs it the most. Those who administer and manage, you'll never know when those procedures and policies you set in place or those people you manage find your leadership becomes a turning point and a blessing for them. You never know. You'd be surprised. That is the message Jesus offers to his listeners as he shares with them the parable of the sheep and the goats, which we heard moments earlier. This parable is the 4th of 4 in a series toward the end of Jesus' earthly ministry. The four parables all have several things in common. They are all about the end times. They are all about waiting. They are all about what we do with our lives while we wait. You recall the story? The Son of Man returning in all his glory is not only the merciful shepherd of the sheep, as we heard from the prophet Ezekiel earlier. He is also the one who judges. And our lives are not without judgment because behaviors do have consequences. And God expects our lives to be consequential. That is why God has created us. So, Jesus divides the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. And then he explains why. I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was sick, and you comforted me. I was in prison, and you visited me. And his listeners, perplexed, respond, Lord, when did we see you in any of these conditions? And he said, whatever you do to the least of my sisters and brothers, you do to me. And to the goats, he said, you did not feed the hungry, you did not give something to drink to the thirsty, you did not clothe the naked, you did not heal the sick, you did not visit those in prison, you did not welcome the stranger. And what you did not do to the least of these, you did not do to me. This is Christ the King Sunday, and we honor and praise Christ. We ask him to be the King of our lives. We prepare ourselves to set aside all those false gods, those wooden idols, those promises which do not produce, those seductions which do not satisfy. And how curious it is that Jesus thinks of the least of these, our sisters and brothers. We know that often those in leadership like to hobnob with the rich and the famous. They like to go to fancy dinner parties. They like to go to galas. They like to be in the center of attention. They like to be with important people. They like to be in places where there is celebration. And lest you think that Jesus did not have joyful moments in his life, remember, according to John's Gospel, Jesus kicked off his career at a wedding party at Cana, and he even brought the wine. Well, he didn't bring it, he changed the water into wine. And Jesus welcomed the little children. So we know even from the Gospels that Jesus knew the joy of life. He knows our joy of living. But clearly the Gospels demonstrate that he sought out the least of our sisters and brothers. He sought those who were marginalized, those who lived in the shadows and on the margins, those who suffered, those who were victims of oppression and violence, those who lived under the grinding heel of poverty. And he tells his listeners, what you do to the least of these, you do to me. We acclaim Christ as King when we fed the hungry, not with 45 meals, but with 66 meals in the harvest table gathering. You never know. I'm thinking of a friend of mine, Mike, from a previous congregation. He told me about a high school reunion he attended decades later. It might have been his 50th. At that reunion, a man whom he slightly knew from his high school days sought him out to speak with him. This man, as a teenager, had moved into the area and was a new student at the high school. Bullies picked on him. He was a stranger who was not welcomed, as Jesus encouraged. And Mike saw this, and Mike stood up for him and defended him from the bullies. All those years later, he explained to Mike, when I first moved into town as a teenager, the bullies picked on me, nobody welcomed me, but you stood up for me. You defended me. What you never knew is that I was this close to taking my own life. But your coming alongside me made all the difference. You never know. You'd be surprised what difference your life can make. We have a new opportunity to make a difference here at the Unity Presbyterian Church. The mission agency of the Presbyterian Church USA has launched a new initiative based upon the very scripture we have heard today in our lectionary readings. The program is called Matthew 25, and your session has voted to become a Matthew 25 congregation, led by Kim Hatchett and Barb Edwards and Ellen Bennett. We will be seeking to engage with this Matthew 25 mission initiative. Matthew 25 has three dimensions to it. First, building congregational vitality. And oh, how much we need congregational vitality, challenged by the merger of three former congregations and trying to discern how to be God's faithful people as one congregation, the Unity Presbyterian Church. The second dimension is dismantling structural racism. Many of us do not think of ourselves as racists, but Jesus says that is not enough. We must work for justice for all people and dismantle those elements of our society woven into our very structures and the ways we do things in organized society so as to banish racism. And third, eradicating systemic poverty. Poverty which arises not from the bad choices or misfortunes individuals have, but from structures of society which makes it difficult for people to get ahead, for people to leave behind their struggles, to grow beyond their disadvantage, to recover from their bad choices. Our Matthew 25 team will be exploring with you how we might do this as a new congregation, and they will be talking with you beginning in the new year about how we might do this so that we can catch a common vision. You never know. Many decades ago, a poet named Edwin Markham wrote a poem entitled How the Great Guest Came. The poem starts like this. Before the cathedral in grandeur rose, at Ingleburg, where the Danube goes, before its forests of silver spires, went softly up to the clouds and fires. Before the oak had ready a beam, while yet the arch was stone and dream, There, where the altar was later laid, Conrad, the cobbler, plied his trade. And Markham's poem goes on to describe how Conrad the cobbler received word that the Lord was to visit him. It happened one day at the year's white end. Two neighbors called on their old-time friend, and they found the shop so meager and mean, made gay with 100 boughs of green. Conrad was stitching with face ashine, but suddenly stopped as he twitched at time. Old friends, good news. At dawn today, as the cocks were scaring the night away, the Lord appeared in a dream to me and said, I am coming, your guest to be. So I have been busy with feet astir, strewing the floor with branches of fir. The wall is washed and the shelf is shined, and over the rafter the holly twined. He comes today, and the table is spread with milk and honey and wheaten bread. His poem goes on to describe the remainder of Conrad's day. After his friends departed, he continued his work preparing for the visitation, the holy visitation of the Lord. And during the course of the day, he encountered a beggar drenched in the driving rain. And then he encountered a woman bearing a heavy burden. And then he encountered a little child who was lost and afraid. And Markham's poem concludes, the sun went down in the crimson west, and with it the hope of the blessed guest. And Conrad sighed as the sky turned gray. Why is it, Lord, that your feet delay? Did you forget that this was the day? Then soft, in the silence, a voice he heard. Lift up your heart, for I kept my word. 3 times I came to your friendly door. 3 times my shadow was on your floor. I was the beggar with bruised feet. I was the woman you gave to eat. I was the child on the homeless street. You'd be surprised. You never know. Sometimes we sheep become the shepherd. Join us now as we sing together, Savior, like a shepherd lead us.